Hi, my name is Jonathan Maberry, and don't worry, nobody's listening.
Weirdly, at events, people cosplay me, which is strange. They're up with a fake white beard, a Hawaiian shirt, jeans, and usually holding a book. The weirdest was when a couple wanted me to use a Sharpie to sign their baby.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Hey everybody, I'm screenwriter and novelist Edward Savio. And no, you haven't stumbled onto writers with beards. This here's a gift to my partner. She likes beards. We'll unpack that on a future episode. So here's how this goes. Once we get started, we're going to pretend you're not here. But until then, there's a book that came out when I was in my 20s called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Things like share with others, play fair, clean up your messes, say you're sorry, wash your hands. It's solid advice. But here's the thing. Lists aren't how we actually learn. Even the most famous list of all, the 10 Commandments, doesn't magically make people good just because they've read it. We learn by watching people, by seeing how they behave, how they work, how they talk, how they show up over and over again. If you're a reader, you might only tune in to the episodes with writers you already know or are curious about, and that's fine. But if you're a writer, I'd encourage you to listen to or watch all of these episodes, all the way through. There isn't one way to write. No one can give you a single checklist all writers agree on. What I can offer you are dozens of writers and creators modeling different paths, some that will apply to you, some that won't. But even the things that don't fit you are going to challenge your way of thinking. Which brings me to today's guest, Jonathan Maberry. I could list his credits: 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, creator of V-Wars on Netflix, author of some of the best action horror thriller mashups out there. But the most important thing I can tell you about Jonathan is this: he gives back. Every Thursday, he shows up for the community with his weekly Ask Me Anything on Facebook. His website, jonathanmaberry.com, is packed with resources for writers: sample query letters, outline and synopsis examples, beat sheets, revision strategies, real help, no gatekeeping. If you don't know Jonathan Maberry, first of all, what rock have you been living under? If it involves monsters, mayhem, or military-grade ass-kicking, Jonathan's had a hand in it. But beneath all that action, he's also a deep thinker about fear, where it comes from, why it works, and what it says about us. We're going to dive into his writing process, his thoughts on genre fiction, and probably a few things that'll keep you up at night. And so, here's my conversation with Jonathan Maberry. Maybe grab a crossbow, reinforce the doors, and until we're done, don't open those doors for anyone you don't recognize.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Wow. You make me sound more talented than I am.
Jonathan, I really want to say thank you for being one of our first guests here. I really enjoy talking to people who do what I do and understand this process, which not everyone does. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Do people in your life understand what you do?
It was a learning process, but yeah, it's taken a while for them to understand that just because I'm not actively typing doesn't mean I'm not writing. And that, I think it was the hardest part of it. And it comes down to something Ray Bradbury told me when I was a kid. He said, writing is 99% thinking about it and the rest is typing. So there are times I'll be sitting there playing solitaire on my phone while working through a plot point in my head, and that is not a time to interrupt the writer. It's funny, you could almost interrupt them more safely while they're typing, because now they know what they're going to say, rather than when they're sitting there just kind of staring off into space. But yeah, it took a while, and I made sure that I negotiated with my family for time. Even when I'm at a convention, sometimes I'll be in the cafe area between panels typing, and I used to carry a little placard. On one side, it says, sure, ask. On the other side, it says, go away. And it's not a mean thing. It's just the creative process even though it is not as elusive as a lot of people say it is when they mythologize the whole process, it can still be interrupted, and the delay of getting back up to speed and to catching the same elements that you're trying to weld together may take a little bit of time, and that's time wasted. And so, yeah, they've learned how to deal with it. My door is closed. Generally, that means don't knock.
Yeah, I always tell people I'm always working and never working.
The creative mind doesn't get a day off, and it would be nice if we could, and then have all the stuff catch up to us when we're back online, but it doesn't work that way. I mean, I could be doing the laundry and have characters start talking in my head, and that's part of the job, you know.
Vacationing is huge.
My wife and I went to Aruba a dozen years ago or more, and the plan was for me to take a week off, completely off from writing. First couple of days, you know, that was great. And then I kept sneaking a notebook down to the poolside, and when she wasn't looking, I'd be making notes, and she's like, just write the damn thing. So, you know, I started bringing my iPad down and working a little bit. But, you know, you can't trust a memory either. You can't trust that if you have an idea, you're going to remember it later on when you're in front of your desk being a writer.
That is the worst feeling, that sweat-inducing moment where you have the idea, you pick up something to write it down, but on that thing, whatever it is, there's another note, and you went, oh, da, 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 and you then all of a sudden you're like, wait. And then you start, I'm going to walk back, redo what I did, and go, I was picking up this piece of garbage off the floor.
Yeah. Those types of, you know, repeat behavior memory triggers are pretty useful, but I have notebooks everywhere. So I'm never more than like a half step away from grabbing a notebook, always with a pen or pencil clipped to it, because I don't trust a memory, you know.
I was talking with Chris Moore about this, and Chris and I were saying, I am absolutely always closer to a writing implement or a laptop than I am to food.
Yeah.
How did you get into this? You know, for me, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and the writing became the thing.
I guess the first time I was ever asked what I wanted to be when I grow up was third grade. This was a space race era. Half the kids wanted to be either soldiers because their fathers were in World War II, or they wanted to be astronauts. And I said I wanted to tell stories. And most of the kids laughed at me. And my teachers thought I was weird, but that was fine. In high school, though, I changed my focus. It was right after the Watergate era. And all of us who were into writing wanted to be the next Woodward or Bernstein. We wanted to be the investigative reporter that broke the story and tore down the corrupt, whatever. And I actually went to Temple University on a journalism scholarship. That was my plan, to be a newspaper writer. And being a newspaper writer is probably the only thing I haven't yet done in writing. Halfway through college, I took a class on magazine feature writing. Halfway through that class, I started pitching to magazines and started selling magazine articles using the old write what you know thing.
Yeah.
And I've been doing martial arts since I was 6. So I started pitching to Black Belt magazine. They didn't know I was a college student. All they knew is that I understood what I was talking about. So I did nonfiction writing for 35 years. And it wasn't until the early 2000s, after I had been a writer part-time my whole life. My main jobs, I was a bodyguard for years in the entertainment industry. I was a bouncer for years. I was a jiu-jitsu master and also ran self-defense programs for everything from the physically challenged and the visually impaired up to SWAT and special forces. I taught all that. That was my day job. Writing was part-time. And then I wrote a book on supernatural folklore. Even my publisher thought it was weird. So at the time, he asked me to do it under a pen name, which I did. And it outsold my martial arts books 30-1, collectively 30-1. And I kept looking for novels that used the folkloric versions of monsters as opposed to the Hollywood versions. Like in folklore, vampires are not afraid of the cross. They're not afraid of sunlight. They do not burst into flames when they go outside. They do not need to be invited in to come into a house. All that was made up by writers. And since I couldn't find many of them, my wife said, just stop bitching about it and write the thing. So I took 3.5 years and wrote a novel. I wrote my first novel.
Where was this in timeline in your life?
It was around 2000 that I kind of started the process, a little into the first year of the new millennium. And it took me 3.5 years and 18 revisions to get the novel to the point where I thought it was as done as it should be before I make a decision about it. And up to that point, I still wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue fiction or just I was writing this to get it out of my head. On a whim, decided to go look for an agent, spent a couple of days composing a query letter, sent it to the 10 top agents I could find on my list, and got 6 requests for full or partial manuscripts and 4 offers of representation, which shocked the hell out of me. And that book, Ghost Road Blues, went on to not only get a publishing deal within like 2 months of me getting the agent, It was nominated for 2 Bram Stoker Awards. I won one of them. I won the Best First Novel, which is yay. I mean, that's an important one to win.
Yep.
I lost Novel of the Year to some up-and-coming cat named, what's his name, Stephen King? Have you?
That
And
plucky upstart.
Lizzie's story is the one that beat me. But as a validation, though, of maybe this fiction thing might be worthwhile pursuing, it really worked. And now that came out in 2006, the first book. It is 2025, and I am writing my 53rd novel.
This is something, for those of you eavesdropping who shouldn't be listening, you should not feel bad if you are not writing 53 novels in 19 years.
Actually, let me give you an example about that, too, because one of my buddies, when I became a novelist, is Dennis Tafoya. And he's a crime novelist, and he writes like one literary crime novel like every 5 to 8 years. And that's the speed he likes. And people say, that's too slow. Yeah, well, his book, Dope Thief, just debuted to incredible ratings, produced and directed by Ridley Scott. So clearly, going slower isn't necessarily a bad thing. The idea is you find the speed at which you do your best work. I know that if I have more time to write, the stuff usually gets more heavily edited by my editors, and it doesn't get as well reviewed. If I write fast, like The Building is on Fire, it tends to sell better, be better reviewed, and just overall be better received. So,
again, we'll get more into process, but whenever I'm looking and being self-critical about my stuff is that as a screenwriter, I'm like, things need to move along. Mm-hmm. I don't write books always like that because I wanted to expand myself from that's what I did for a long time. You give a lot of details in certain parts, but you also skip a lot of detail in places because the action takes you through and your mind is filling in the blanks. But it's all about the action and the character. So having said that, who have been your influences?
Geez, I mean, some of my influences are also people that I met. I was fortunate enough as a kid, because of my middle school librarian and her connections within the book world, to meet and be mentored by people like Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson and Harlan Ellison and so on. I had that.
Harlan Ellison.
Yeah, Harlan was a great guy. But also, he was a kind and gentle person. He was most angry at anyone taking advantages of writers, as opposed to the writers themselves. He gets a bad rap as a cranky man. He was outraged. That's not the same as being cranky.
I see him as the Bill Burr of writers.
To a great degree. Also a bit of the Jon Stewart.
Exactly, yes.
But as far as my influences, the first book I ever actually bought was the one right behind my shoulder here, Conan the Wanderer. That type of fantasy fiction is different from, say, a Robert Jordan, where it is huge world building. This is world building as you need to know it. Ed McBain, with his dialogue-heavy story structure, where a lot is learned through conversation as opposed to narrative. Harlan Ellison did a lot of that too, and both of them also used the broken paragraph structure to create more visible dramatic beats in the thing, which gives it a better sense of pace. Probably the strongest single influence in terms of the way I tell a story is John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels. Absolutely foundational for me in understanding how to tell a story and be able to inform even during the action without slowing the action down. And James Lee Burke, a literary, edgy, gritty crime novelist, and his ability to use poetic influences and have them visible within the structure of the story, I find absolutely compelling. And it's one of the reasons I read poetry for anywhere from half an hour to an hour every day before I write my prose.
I love that. You had said that to me offline. As a screenwriter, I had to master the economy of words. I'm really good with dialogue, banter, and things like that. But I really wanted to get into the prose. When I find in a book a beautiful piece of prose that just I'm like, oh man, and I highlight it. I want to study that. I want to break it down. And sometimes for people writing prose to get inspiration, verse can give you this melodic sense of song that you need when you need your action to feel like it's a train running down a track. You know what I mean?
Yes, and one of the things about poetry and lyrics too, but one of the things about that is the poet's ability to take a complex emotional moment or a complex visual moment and distill them down to the fewest possible words is so worthwhile for novelists to use, especially since my novels are long. That's why when I read poetry, I read it aloud, because when you read it aloud, you are co-creating the meaning of the poem in that moment by your own interpretation and inflection. and your own beats and breaths.
This is very interesting to me because I have had other people narrate my audiobooks. I ended up doing one that was a much more personal story, and I read it, and I literally rewrote some parts of the book after doing the audio because the way it sang when I spoke it. I was looking over all the books that I have of yours, and Cave 13, and the dedication to both your niece and your brother. And you didn't just dedicate it to these people you had lost. You spoke about a Vietnam War veteran, PTSD. Joe Ledger started as this confident hero. He's more of a he's got a lot of shit that's going on in his life. Did your brother influence your writing? Did that come into it, or was that something that just was not discussed, or it was, or?
Unfortunately, my brother and I were also estranged for many years too. We had such irreconcilable political differences. It made it hard for us to have a conversation. But I understand that a lot of that was also a side effect of the damage he went through in Vietnam. He did several tours. He lost all of his friends who enlisted with him. They all died over there, and he saw their deaths. So he came back badly damaged, and yet spent a good chunk of his life helping other veterans. So there's that dichotomy of the damaged person trying to undo the damage he sees in others while not being able to be the person who diagnoses and treats the damage he went through. And that definitely is an influence. But also, I was a kid in the 60s. I was born in the late 50s, kid in the 60s and 70s. So we were seeing not only our parents who had been in World War II in Korea, but our brothers and uncles and cousins who were coming back from Vietnam. And it was so different than what you see in, like, there was a show called Combat on television. It was a Vic Morrow World War II story, very entertaining. Nobody gets PTSD, but in real life, more people come home damaged than come home completely whole. But also, I grew up in a very troubled household. My father was a criminal and abuser of my sisters and myself. He was very violent, and he was huge. I'm a big man. He was bigger than I am now. I'm 6'4". So I grew up in a horror show situation. It's why I got involved in martial arts. It's why I became tough, because I knew I'd eventually have to fight him. So the idea of carrying damage with you and, knowing that you have scars, whether you're afraid to look at them or whether you need to look at them, whether they influence your actions or whether they're a silent cancer within you that you're not addressing, all of those things play into my understanding of trauma. So when I created the Joe Ledger character, I started off with somebody who has been through trauma, but the structure of martial arts has given him enough of solid ground to stand on that he can move forward and use his damage to help other people. So in that one regard, there is a bit of my brother there, because he used his damage to try to help other people, and unfortunately lost that fight, but he did manage to help a lot of people along the way. My hope is that his suicide did not destroy the good work that he did. And with Joe Ledger, in each book, he gets a little more damaged. And it's become kind of a conversation of when he needs to lay down the sword and shield and get off the battlefield.
It is a unique thing, I think, for a hero. When I've gone through this journey, I've developed characters across both standalone books and series and thought about them into the future. That is not a normal path. Like, that kind of damage, normally our heroes get more ridiculously powerful. And I find that something that is unique about that character.
And I'm not going to name any names in the writing community, but one of the issues is people try to use their character to solve their own problems.
Right.
So if they got trauma, the character faces a moment of trauma and gets past it, and they think that that's possible. You don't just have a good day of insight and suddenly all your ghosts have been chased away. It does not work like that. I've done a lot of work in therapy. I've done a lot of personal work to deactivate as many triggers as possible from my childhood and other things. But you still carry the memories, and sometimes one little thing can trigger it again. And that's what living with trauma and PTSD is like. There's always more work to do. The real problems come is when we think we've done all the work that needs to be done. As a person, that's a danger thing. As a writer, you've solved the problem for your character. Now the character is Superman for every book after that. Not a fan of that.
That's not how life works.
It's really not. In fact, what you need to do sometimes to get over one bit of trauma can sometimes create a different type of scar. And you have to be aware of that. It's like a surgical scar maybe, but it's still a scar.
Yeah. All right. This is a good place to take a break. We'll be right back. And for all of those who are listening in, please stop.
We've got a lot more to come, including weird fan interactions. We're going to be talking about you. I want to give a big shout out to Bookstr, home to a huge community of readers, for partnering with us so we can go deep with these writers. They said yes, so you can eavesdrop on our conversations. Readers, there's a lot of excellent content, recommendations, and Q&As with authors. Writers, Bookstr helps you reach new readers. Whether you're a reader or a writer, check out Bookstr, noe.com. And now, even though you're not supposed to be listening, back to the show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Don't Worry, No One's Listening. I'm here with best-selling author Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan, we were talking both before the break and during the break just about life, and I really appreciate you sharing and getting personal about this because it is such a personal journey that we take as writers. I want to get deeper right now into the process.
Sure.
You are, as you said to me offline, writing a book about every 90 days.
Mhm.
How the hell are you doing that, and what's your process?
All right. So I didn't start off that fast. I got faster over time, but I like fast. And I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was trained as a journalist. And when you're trained as a newspaper reporter, you don't have days to revise and think about it. You have to write it quick and dirty, fix it and then rewrite and move on. And I learned that. That was my skill set. Maybe if I had gone to college for creative writing, I would be a slower writer. I don't know. All I know is that I like the fast lane. That's part of it. A lot of people waste a lot of their time without realizing they waste a lot of their time. I run these things, the writers' coffeehouses, and it's writers of all kinds of we network. And you get a lot of people talking about the book they want to write, and they're doing the research and they're planning and they're doing this, but they're not actually writing. They're planning to write.
Yes.
I would rather get an idea, do a quick development and get something down to turn it from idea to reality in some, however minor a structure. But you figure if you were to write a 150,000 word novel in 90 days, that's 1,600 words a day. Like, that is not a lot of words.
It's not a lot of words. It's a lot of final words.
Right. So the thing about writing a book every 90 days is I don't start thinking about the book on day one. I start thinking about the book when I'm writing the last book.
Sure.
Like right now, I'm writing the third of my Necrotech series. I'm writing a book called Ghosts in the Void. And after that, it'll be the second of my Sleeper's War science fiction series. So I'm doing tons of research for Sleeper's War, gravitational science, drive systems for starships, all that stuff. I'm doing that research now. I'm sending emails out to experts in different fields to get my questions answered. I have a bullet pointed outline that I created when I first come up with the idea, and then I keep tweaking that. I keep my outlines very bare bones so they can be more easily manipulated.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big prose outlines, which reads like a synopsis, makes it very difficult to make subtle changes because there's such a burden of work every time you make those changes.
I agree. I think sometimes I overwrite my notes. First of all, I agree with you. One of my novels, The Velvet Sledgehammer, I wrote, it's my past, but the present is negotiating the WTO in 1993. Like, the guy's the lead negotiator. And I did no research while I was writing the book at first. I just wrote the story as I knew the story and made shit up as I was going along. And if I had gotten in the weeds about the minutia about negotiating, number one, it wouldn't have been funny. Number two, I would have gotten locked into that. And then after I finished the first draft, I called up Mickey Cantor, who was the guy who actually negotiated it during Bill Clinton's administration. He was like, I'll give you 5 minutes. An hour and 5 minutes later, we were laughing because he's telling me these stories about having to drag some of the ministers, the trade ministers, out of the elevator on those little hand carts because they didn't want to vote because they didn't want this thing. But he's like, no, you're coming out here. But I do agree that sometimes I can overwrite that. So when you go through, you're doing the bare bones, and
My outline, yeah.
And is it something that if you needed to do more somewhere else, where does that stuff go?
Yeah, so like I'm always jotting down notes, and I have a file folder for that book. So any note goes into that file folder, and then I'll sit down, like the beginning of my work week, I'll go through my notes and see if there's anything in there that needs to be added to the section I'm working on now. And I also go through the notes when I'm looking at my outline on day one of the thing. I have the outline, but I type those things in to wherever they might appear within the story itself. But I also do a kind of what I call a rolling outline. So if I've started chapter 1 and I get this, the tone, the voice of the book, and I know that the next couple of chapters are going to deal with the opening set piece, well, I can go ahead and make notes on just those chapters and flesh them out a little bit. It takes me half an hour, 40 minutes to go and flesh them out. And then I can not only write them, I can write them out of sequence. Because sometimes there's a burden of writing in sequence because it requires that you know everything. You don't know everything about your book. One of the things that blocks people, and I hate the term writer's block because it's not a real thing.
I agree.
Bunch of things that are lumped under one umbrella. But sometimes what blocks people is they have a good idea to get started, but they don't know where to go next. So, all right, pause to plot. That's one thing. Pause to do research. One of the things I like doing is I jump ahead and write scenes further into the book that I know are key scenes and are less likely to be changed, so that I can then start aiming at them and maybe even write the last part of the book, aim at that. It allows me to stay focused without going off into tangents. My earliest writer mistake was I didn't have, even though I had an outline, it wasn't as clear an outline. It wasn't as solid an equation of cause and effect as I work on now. And I would also fall in love. I was falling in love with fiction at the time. So I would fall in love with writing about this character, writing about that, even if they didn't serve the plot. And then I ran into that whole kill your darlings thing where a lot of those things, which I feel maybe some of my best writing, don't belong in the book. And I don't want to waste my time like that. So I stopped writing the scenes that I don't feel are going to be appropriate. However, sometimes you can get a revisionist view of your thing. Like I was out walking on the bluffs in Del Mar when I was working on my first Necrotech book. And I had an idea about a scene that is not in my outline, but it makes sense, so much sense to be in the book somewhere. I went to a coffee shop, wrote it down, and plugged it into the book. And that scene is actually one of the ones that my readers find the most compelling, that tells them more about the world than any other single chapter. Because sometimes you have to allow yourself, even when you outline, to do a little bit of creative writing here and there, maybe a scene, maybe an exchange of dialogue, and then see if that changes the overall complexion of the book, the voice of it. I think some people get into this view that once they start on a certain method, they have to stick with that method, even if it's not serving them for this book. It might serve them for the last book and the next book, but not this one. Each book is different. So you have to be able, the more you pay attention to your process, the more you can manipulate it. It's very much like the elements of craft. The more you know about figurative and descriptive language, pace, and tone, you can manipulate those to serve your book. The same goes with your process. Your process is an element of craft. And if you pay attention to it, you can then be better at your craft.
That elusive writer's block, the BS, because it really isn't a thing. It's a bunch of stuff put together. Like, for instance, it is easy if you have some idea of where you're going to write that out of sequence or to work on that next story so you're always productive. I think what happens is when people just start focusing on the one thing they're working on, that's how you can get stopped up.
Yeah, and there's a trick I use for that too. I use a phrase called edit this, all caps. So if I get to the next scene that I will be writing, but there's elements of it that I haven't either done the research on or haven't considered or whatever, but I still need to get through the chapter, I'll put edit this, research mutations, and then I'll just move forward as if that's already in the book. I can't write the book on assumption, but I can write a draft on assumption. It hasn't stopped me from moving forward. And also there's incidental research, and I use that a ton when writing. So, and it creates not only reality, but also makes the place I'm writing about more real to me because I'm integrating my story with this real place. But it's incidental research, and I move on. The danger, though, is some people, and I can be as guilty of this as anyone, they do spot research and they go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Get any research you need and move on. Don't pick up ammunition that's not for the gun you're carrying.
Totally true. Best piece of writing advice you ever got. You mentioned Ray Bradbury, but...
Well, it is a Ray Bradbury. Actually, Bradbury and Matheson were talking to me about how to be a good writer. And Matheson's thing was, you always want to write the book that you would want to read. And Bradbury said, that's only partly correct. He said, you should write the book you would go out of your way to hunt down and read. Write the book you would be obsessive about. Write that book. And those two bits of advice were really important because what they do is they instill a sense of joy in the writing for that book. And if there's not joy in the writing, it shows in the reading. Even if the material of that scene, the substance of it is dark, if you like the process of exploring the human dynamic, the cause and effect, the fears, the emotions, the setting, that's fun. There's a fun in writing even dark stuff. First time I did a novelization of something, Wolfman, the Benicio del Toro version of it.
Okay.
And it wound up actually being my first bestseller. And you don't get to see the movie when you do a novelization. You get to see the script, and that is it. I did what I call the Dickens approach to the Wolfman. In A Christmas Carol, the descriptions of what's going on the city street as they're walking down it are so rich, and they touch all five senses that you can see it, feel it, taste it, hear it, all of it. I wanted to apply that to scenes in the Wolfman because A Christmas Carol is one of the best novels ever written. It's short, and yet there's so much crammed in there, and it's so influential.
I came late to Dickens. I probably read my first Dickens novel in like 2009, and then it was like a few years afterwards I read David Copperfield, which just blew me away.
Deep character development in that book.
It surprised me how contemporary it felt. Worst piece of advice writers get.
Oh, worst piece of advice is when I decided to look for an agent, so many people told me to shoot for a low-level agent because they're the only ones likely to take a flyer on a brand new writer.
Wrong.
I thought that was spectacularly bad advice. So I went the other direction. I believe try audacity first. And if it doesn't work, you can always take a step back down. Harder to climb up than to climb down. So I shot for the agents representing the 10 top writers in the genre of my first novel.
Lisa, for those people not viewing, not listening, is my producer, was my agent. She is off camera. One of Lisa's superpowers as my agent was that she didn't know where not to go.
You fail 100% of the times you don't try.
Yep.
That's an extension of that, but you only need to succeed that one first time to get your foot in the door. If you don't try, you don't get. Another way of saying a phrase I like is you can't get hit by a car if you're not playing in traffic.
That is a true statement. We're about to take a quick break again, but I just want to ask you one last thing. Most unexpected turn your writing career has taken?
Comics, actually. I had wanted to get into comics. I grew up as a Marvel kid. Still have my very first comic sitting up on the shelf up there, Fantastic Four 66. And my agent and I were trying to figure out how to pitch to Marvel when, out of the blue, the editor-in-chief of Marvel called me. He picked up my novel Patient Zero, the first Joe Ledger novel, at an airport kiosk flying from LAX to New York, read it, called me out of the blue and asked me if I'd like to write for Marvel. It's like, first off, that is the dumbest question anyone ever gets asked. Like, do you want to write for Marvel? Oh, go away. Take your high money and celebrity and career boost, and you just get on out of the house with that. Now, luckily, I have a good phone voice. Physically, I'm doing the Snoopy dance around my office, but phone voice is, well, sure, I'll put you in touch with my agent if we can work out the numbers, and then I go off the phone and I freaked out. So yeah, that I didn't see that coming at all.
It's funny you talk about the Snoopy dance. I once had pitched something to Dawn Steele at Paramount, an idea for a Star Trek movie, and I had no cred, nothing at the time, hadn't yet made my first major big studio sale, but she liked the idea enough. And I'm sitting at home and I get a phone call and it's Bill Shatner. And Bill's like about to direct the fifth one. He sat with me and talked to me for 25 minutes about this, but I remember just being on the phone going, oh my God, my buddy who was staying at my house, he's like, what's going on? I go, I was just on the phone with Captain Kirk. To this day, he still gives me shit. It's like, it's 3 years later. He gives me shit about it.
Well, I got a call from my agent saying that Chad Stahelski, director of John Wick, wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, oh man, another one of these. I'm going to drive all the way to LA and talk to him for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and then go home and nothing happens. As soon as I walked into his office, he met me at the door and said, look, first thing I want to tell you is I have no interest in making a Joe Ledger movie. And there was a beat. And then he said, we need to make this for television so we don't lose any of the character development. And as a result, he is developing it for television now.
As a person who was a screenwriter first, did not have a lot of contacts in television. Television used to be separate before premium television. The bigger stories can be told on these longer.
And it should be. That's why shows like Reacher work so well, because you dig into the character development, and a lot of it is character performance that goes beyond even what the narrative describes in the book. And that collaboration of director, writer, actor, cinematographer all tells more story in 6, 8, or 10 episodes than you could tell 90 minutes of a film.
When we come back, that's actually what I wanted to start back up on is adaptation. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is Don't Worry, No One's Listening.
Okay, while we're taking a quick break, I want to say thanks to my producer, Lisa Lindo, who you can't see or hear. She is the ghost in the machine keeping us all on track, or at least trying to, by telling me during these breaks what I didn't do, which is what she's probably doing right now. So when you hear out of context mentions of Lisa, that's who we're talking about. Say hi to everyone, Lisa. Like I said, you can't see her or hear her. The platform doesn't record producers. It has something to do with their magic.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to get into some fun and games in a moment, but I want to start with something we finished with in the last segment, which is adaptation. Seeing your work, hearing your work in a different way. I started as a screenwriter, so I've heard my work spoken. I've heard it before I ever started writing prose. I've had actors say my lines, but you didn't come from that direction first. So how was that the first time anything you ever wrote came out of a book and went onto a screen?
The very first thing of mine that was on screen was V-Wars. It was a comic book, and with a lot of comic book companies, you actually own 50% of it, and the company owns the other half. They got to call a lot of the shots. I was not even an executive producer until literally 3 days before the show aired. So I was not involved in the creative process much at all. A lot of the actors reached out to me about their characters, but the way the show was written and even structured by the showrunners was substantially different from my material. And I'm not going to bitch about how they didn't do my version of it, because the books and the comics were already done. So my versions are out there. They're always going to be out there. I would like it to have been edgier, but they did the version they felt was appropriate. Unfortunately, it's a plague show that launched at the beginning of COVID. And even though we were number one in 120 global markets, Netflix canceled it because it was a plague show.
Yeah.
And then, that's Hollywood. But with V-Wars, there are a lot of my lines that are there. I think it was the most startling during the table read, because I'd never been to a table read before.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Oh my God, I went to it. And one of the weird things is I'm such a pop culture nerd, and I'm walking into a room with a lot of actors and actresses I've seen in many other things, and I'm kind of nerd boying out, and they all stood up and applauded. And I literally looked behind me to see who they were applauding. And it was pointed out to me by Ian Somerhalder, who was the star of the show, that everyone here has a job right now because of what you wrote. That never occurred to me. Never. And with the Joe Ledger series that Chad Stahelski is developing, he's kept me in the loop on everything. And I have a feeling that the version of it they're going to do will be close to my books while still being original and fresh for whatever network it goes out on.
Adapting is an interesting thing, because I've both adapted other people's work and I've adapted my own for Sony. And Wendy Feinerman, who's the Academy Award winning producer of Forrest Gump, this book called Idiots in the Machine. I, first of all, as a screenwriter first, knew how to adapt, or at least see my own work in a different light. I also realized any notes I got, any changes we made, my book would still be there.
Yep.
My book would still be there. And so it was freeing in a way. You mentioned about audio. Ray Porter has done about 1.5 million of your books.
Yep.
I love Ray. Ray just did my last book in the Battle for Forever series. Wil Wheaton did the first 2. And when Wil dropped out, I was like, who could I possibly have that has that kind of gravitas?
Will's pretty great.
Wil's amazing. I love that. The only person who could follow Wil up is, and when I said this to Ray's, oh yeah, I don't know. He's the 800-pound gorilla. I'm like maybe 200 pounds. But it was so wonderful working with him. He's funny. I love him. His voice.
Ray is a real gift. He's become one of my dearest friends. He's like closer to me than my family is. It's funny because my path to getting audio was weird. It was maybe my 6th novel. That was my first audio, was The Wolfman. I didn't even know they were doing an audio of it until it debuted at #1. They came out and debuted at #1. And my late friend, Peter Straub, whose book was predicted to debut at #1, debuted at #2. So he sent me an email that basically said, "Fuck you." And I'm like, why is Peter Straub mad at me? And he explained, and I didn't even know there was an audiobook. And it was so weird. And Fred Berman did a great job with it. It was fantastic. But my next audiobook was Patient Zero with Ray Porter. And Josh Stanton over at Blackstone hired Ray to do this. And right out of the box, Ray just put his own stamp on it to the point where I now hear Ray's voice when I'm writing dialogue for all of my key characters. Also, he does something that is maybe has more than a toe over the line into witchcraft, in that he doesn't pre-read the book. He does his recordings as cold reads.
Will also does not do that as well. We were talking about this because I did the audio for this book, Velvet Sledgehammer, because it's personal. Ray and I were talking about this. I said, Ray, my first book with Will was like 10 hours and 45 minutes finished. I know he worked on it about 20 hours in the studio. I'm like, where are you at? Are you at that 2-to-1? Ray's like, yeah, 2-to-1, 1.8 to 1. He goes, what about you? And I go, I was around 9 or 10 to 1.
It's why I don't record my own stuff. I mean, I have a little bit of theater background. I was in,
and you have a great voice.
But I don't have professional timing. Also, it would not be as much fun to listen to later on. I love listening to performances of my work because I get to be the audience for it, because they'll inflect differently than I intend.
That's right.
Which means the interpretation is slightly different, and that's performance. I mean, how I sat through his reading of the Complete Idiot's Guide to String Theory. He made that interesting.
I remember the first time I ever heard Ray, and I told him this, and he's like, oh my God, was the 4-Hour Work Week. It was like a million years ago, probably like 2006, 2008, something like that. One of the things I feel with both Will and Ray, I did this book because it was personal. I had an insight into it. I don't think anyone else would have been better to do that because of the subject matter only. When I'm listening to Ray and I'm listening to Will do my work, it's another layer. It's an enhancement. And I've both read your books and I've listened to Ray, and they give me different experiences.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, I really did enjoy your read of Velvet Sledgehammer. So you did a great job with it. Sometimes you forget when you write. You forget that you have written certain things. And when you're rereading it, you tend to skim because you know what the story is. You tend to skim. Right. In an audiobook, every word is there. And sometimes you hear things that were clunky, and thank God I have a good narrator for being able to make a clunky sentence work. But it inspires you to write better sentences.
I won't name names for some very big writers. I do not hear this or even read this in you. The he said, she said, he said, she said, he said, she said. I didn't run into this problem maybe because as a screenwriter, I didn't do it. When you're reading it, it doesn't sound bad. When you hear it read by, blah, 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 he said, da, 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 she said. Have you had any changes to what you do?
Well, I've been an audiobook fan longer than I've been a novelist. So, I mean, that's, as much as I love reading the old Robert P. Parker Spencer novels, he said, she said, every single line, even if it's 2 characters in an empty room, it's every line, and it becomes impossible to listen to an audio. I don't care how good the quality of the reader is. I can't do the audio one. I have to read the print.
Yep.
There are times you need it because if you have 3 characters talking, and
I usually try to put stage direction in, or sometimes.
And sometimes that works. But sometimes you need to get this conversation out because it's important.
Yep.
And you also need to be cognizant of the overall word count of the book. So there is some of that in there, but stage direction is probably my favorite way of doing that. Bill took a cup of coffee, then there's a lot of dialogue. He then said,
That's right. So the person visually reading it sees it, and the narrator knows who's speaking, so they know the voice. One of the most interesting books, Fletch, literally almost doesn't have a he said, she said anywhere. Now it's usually just two people talking to each other, so it's da, 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 da.
And it's very instructive for readers to read those because some of those conversations go on for many pages before you get a tag back. But the trick is if you have two characters talking, but they each have unique speaking structures, it's what we should aspire to be less visible on the page and less visible in the ear. Because if there's too many he said, she said, the reader is hearing us, the writer, not the voice of the book.
Right. Let's do something I call laugh, cry, scream. All right.
Okay.
A book, a movie, or scene that really made you laugh, one that made you cry, and one that made you scream. What's your laugh?
My laughs. One of my go-to laughs is always Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. No matter how many times I listen to it, I can still burst out laughing. And what's neat is, as I become more familiar with science and with space technology, there are different things that are funnier then because he did so much homework, or the character's now more familiar on the second read, and therefore the line is funnier. Mm-hmm. So that series is my go-to for humor. Well, Christopher Moore is my second, pretty much anything he's done.
I got to talk to Chris last week, and it was just Chris. Chris is like, "Hey, I don't get to talk to many people about this. We're going to be here for a while."
He's not wired the same way as other people, and I love that.
I love him. He's real good. What's your cry?
Oh, are you talking cry in despair or cry because it really touches me?
Either way.
All right. Jeez. One of the things that gets me, and almost nobody knows this reference, the movie Across the Universe, Julie Taymor, Beatles, about the 60s and so on. There are a couple of scenes, like there's one, Blackbird, when Ellen Rachel Wood is singing Blackbird, and it's after her brother has just come home from Vietnam, and they're sitting there, and it's clear that he's got that 1,000-yard stare, and hasn't left Vietnam even though he's home again. That was very real to me, and it always brings tears to my eyes. That's probably the one that will do it every single time. There are some that will do it, like if I haven't seen the movie for 3 years, I'll go back there and it'll get me. But that one does it every single time because it was a very, very real moment to me. Because I remember talking to my brother after his second tour, and it was clear to me, even though I was 12 and he was 22, I could tell that he was not in the room with me. He was hearing gunfire and seeing blood. And it changed me forever. So that's that one.
What about scream? And this is either, fear, fright, frustration, or anger that someone opened a door that they shouldn't have.
Virtually any zombie film, even those directed by my friend George Romero, stupid people making stupid choices in movies makes me yell at the screen even when I'm alone. Yelling at the screen when other people were there, you can kind of justify, but when you're alone and you're like, stop fucking doing that, people making stupid decisions in movies, because also it pisses me off that it's also not great writing.
That's right.
The way you can advance the tension, ramp up the tensions by people making stupid choices, you could have gone back and fought that out.
All right, lawyer, agent, editor. Whose life do you save?
Oh, Sarah Crow. I'm saving her from a burning building surrounded by zombies. We've sold 130 things together. I love my agent.
So, by the way, it's so amazing. So when I was doing the research for talking to you, I was looking her up, and I noticed the one thing that was funny. It was like, do not take submission for sci-fi horror. Like,
she's not a fan of the genre, but she knows how to sell it.
Right.
When she wanted to read my book, Ghost Story Blues, on the strength of the query, but she hates horror. So she actually had her assistant read the whole book, and then she read it. No, I don't write in her genre, and she specialized even more and more into children's books. Yeah. And I'm one of the very few people in her stable who writes mostly for adults.
What's something you haven't been asked in an interview that you wish people asked?
Well, I get asked a lot about what I would like to write and so on. And because I write and I worked with media tie-in, I don't get asked often which things I would like to do as an editor within media tie-in. I want to do a Star Wars anthology. Haven't done one yet. I want to do a Star Trek anthology. Haven't done one yet. So that's an area where, as an editor of anthologies, I've done 26 or 28 anthologies. I want to keep doing more, but I want to do more licensed ones. They're harder to sell, though, because they involve a lot of negotiations with the license holder. I think my most recent fun project was a Godzilla versus Cthulhu comic. That was on my bucket list. I wanted to do that, and I couldn't figure out how to get to Toho to get permission. And then an editor reached out of the blue and said, "Hey, how about a Godzilla versus Cthulhu comic?" I said yes before I even asked how much money it was.
Don't let your agent hear that, but yeah.
No, of course not.
Do you read your reviews?
No, not very often. I like reviews for one value. I don't need the ego stroke. The reviews matter most to the team at the publishing house that never gets praise. The editors, the line editors, the proofreaders, the book designers, all of those folks never get a pat on the back. And a review is a pat on the back for them.
Where is this line of where we do it for ourselves and we do it for the fans?
For me, it's a difference between playing and pandering. If I'm writing it just to try to stroke the desires of the reader, that's not good writing. But if I know what the readers are genuinely reacting to, and I can lean into that a little bit, not too much, not to sacrifice the integrity of the story, but to have fun with the readers. They're the ones who sustain the genre in which that product can become successful. Therefore, we all have a part to play, and we're all nerds having fun. I am a professional nerd. I make no excuses. And it doesn't matter how many black belts you have. I'm a book nerd from day one, pop culture nerd. And I get to play with the other people who like the stuff I like. Because remember, I only write the stuff I would want to read.
Right.
So if I'm having fun with it and they're having fun with it, that is a great environment to grow a book. Whereas if I'm just writing to please them, I'm being desperate. That's a fear-based thing. And I don't want to be fear-based. I want to be joy-based in my approach to everything. In fact, even my pendant, it says love over fear. I love the concept of positive engagement with my fans, because I think social media, people forget the social part of that.
Last question before we take a quick break, and then we'll finish things up. If you weren't a writer, what incredibly unsuitable job would you have?
Well, I've had some incredibly unsuitable jobs. Working as a bouncer in a strip club, which I did for 5 years, sucked. It was the most depressing job I've ever had. The second most depressing was I did call floor scripts for Merck Pharmaceutical for adverse experiences of the drugs. Example, the drug Fosamax for osteoporosis. Women would call up and say, I'm losing my hair. Is hair loss a known side effect? I would have to say, hair loss is not a listed side effect. And if they ask me to read the side effects, in there will be alopecia, but we're not allowed to pause and tell them that means hair loss. Writing call floor scripts for that means I'll probably spend a couple of years in hell working off that bad karma. So I've had bad jobs already.
So writing has helped you dodge a bullet there. Everybody, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
If you are listening, despite all our warnings not to, follow the show, rate it, drop me comments and recommendations. I read them very slowly. I can be reached pretty much on all social media at Edward Savio, except, strangely, Facebook, where I'm at Edward Savio Writer. Lisa should be just about wrapping up giving her notes. So let's get back to more with Jonathan Maberry.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I am talking with Jonathan Maberry. When we cut this together, I'm going to put some of these little tidbits out there because the people that need to hear them, the writers that are up and coming, there's some great pieces of information. And I know that you have other information on your website for writers. Why don't you tell people where they can get information about you and from you?
Sure. I mean, the easiest is just to search on my name, and the key there is spelling my last name the right way. People want to put a Y in the middle of my name. But so if you search on Jonathan Maberry, you'll find my website. It has my appearance schedule, it has workshop schedules, and it has a page there called Free Stuff for Writers. And it has a comic book script, a query letter, how to write a synopsis, has lists of all the subgenres. It's a lot of useful stuff. It's all free, downloadable PDFs. Grab what you need, share with your writer friends. Also, you can find me on Facebook on the Writers Coffeehouse, which is a free networking group I created like 25 years ago. We have them all over the country. And it's basically just writers helping writers.
You do a weekly question and answer.
They ask me anything from 4 to 5 Pacific time on Facebook. And
On Thursdays, right?
yeah, and I get prizes for the 2 favorite questions each week.
One of the things that's funny is that people, when they think super fans, groupies, they don't think about writers, but writers absolutely have stans. Weirdest, funniest, strangest fan interaction.
Well, the weirdest was when a couple wanted me to use a Sharpie to sign their baby, and I declined. The mother asked me to do it across her cleavage, which I declined. The husband asked me to do it on his forearm, and I'm like, all right, I'll do that. He had it tattooed, my signature on his arm. It's like, there's no writer I've ever met that I want to have their name tattooed on my body.
No person.
No, there's no,
Not even me.
yeah. And I've met Maya Angelou, Stan Lee, and a bunch of other folks, and I still didn't want their names tattooed. But that's a level of super fan that needs an intervention. Another fan moment that was really strange, and it ties into Hawaiian shirts, is a fellow in front of me turned around, looked at my Hawaiian shirt, looked up and said, "You're Jonathan Maberry." And it was Christopher Eccleston, one of the Doctor Who's. And when he said, "You're Jonathan Maberry," my voice went up like 9 octaves, like, "How the fuck you know that?" Not my best moment. And he's like, "I read?" So that was a weird encounter too.
That's very funny. Your books go to some truly dark places. Have you ever written something twisted or horrifying that you kind of like went, oh?
Oh, I've written some stuff that's definitely repellent to me, but works for the story. The stuff that is too much for me, that after reading it, I feel that it may come off as exploitive, is going to cut for sure, because sometimes you're in the moment, you write something, but then you consider whether what you've written really does serve a narrative, or is you basically yelling at the world for some horrible thing that you've thought about or encountered or experienced.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Weirdest, most dangerous Google search, and how thick do you think your FBI file is?
Oh, I know my FBI file. I know I'm on watchlist because I was also part of a think tank for coming up with bizarre threats to America. In fact, the first time I was involved, they ran the plot for what would have been the 3rd Joe Ledger novel. And after running it for an entire weekend, the best result was a 40% kill of the U.S. population. So they leased that from me for 99 years and in that the verbiage of the contract is basically I never to describe it or write it.
Yeah, when I was doing research for Battle for Forever, the second book, Ancient Among Us, I needed to study what weapons could I make behind security in an airport, bringing nothing in.
Oh, yeah.
And I was traveling with my son, a school thing after 8th grade, going to Washington, D.C. So Boston Airport is where this story takes place. But I'm in D.C. They were selling plasticine Washington monuments behind security.
Oh, boy.
I'm thinking like, what the fuck? And, and I translated that and went, okay, what if they did the same thing with the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston? You take this and a wrapped up magazine, you punch a hole in it, and now you've got a weapon. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it,
It's funny because tomorrow I'm teaching a workshop on writing fight and action scenes, and that sort of stuff plays into the, because there's a subscience of jiu-jitsu called Hidaka Kurosu, means the art of the naked kill. One of the tricks, though, for us writers is not to make our books primers on how to use that stuff.
That's correct.
And so we may know it, but we can only put a percentage in. And that's an editing phase that a writer goes through when you've done the work, and then you got to say, well, am I telling too much? Same thing with fight scenes. There are techniques that could do irreparable harm that even a beginner could do. You don't want to explicitly describe that.
Right. You have to give them the hint or the flavor of that they're getting some information that's forbidden without actually giving them the full forbidden information. I found this quote from Dickens, and it was at the beginning of David Copperfield. It would concern the reader little to know how sorrowful the pen is laid down at the close of a 2 years imaginative task, or how an author feels as if he were dismissing some portion of himself into the shadowy world when a crowd of the creatures of his brain are going from him forever.
That is a great line.
You're 14 books in to Joe Ledger.
Mm-hmm.
You've ended other books. How do you feel when you lay down the pen about these characters?
There's a bit of postpartum going on there. With each book, even books in a series, as you mentioned, Burn to Shine is the 14th book in that series, and I just wrote the 15th, which will be out next March. You fall in love with that group of characters. They become your friends. Even the bad guys, you know them so well, you're in their mind, and then you have to leave them. And sometimes that's really tough because I really like the characters. Maybe one of the reasons I immediately go into the next book. If I finish a novel, say 12 o'clock noon on a Wednesday, 12:05, I'm starting the next book. Just so that, not that I'm going to write a lot of it. I'm still going to take most of the day off that day, but I want to put my brain over there and not have it lingering with the characters I'm missing, because there is a temptation to go back and keep adding more to that story because you like those characters. One of the worst things is when you kill off a character that you know you had to kill off because it's the best and most logical thing for that plot, but damn, you want that character back. And they become people to the readers. And that's magic. That's when you know you're doing your job well. Sometimes you make that character bulletproof, because if that many readers love this particular character, maybe that's also part of what makes the series successful. They're looking forward to that character continuing. That's not when you've already planned to kill that character off.
One of my kids came up one time when a character died, got to that point reading the book, like just stood in my doorway. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yep. I don't go back and change it. If I've done it, I've done it. It's now part of the history of the story.
Yeah. And there was a reason. I mean, there are writers, very famous writers, who just kill people off because they need a body count.
Or they like the shock value of it.
They like the shock value of it. But if I've done it, and it feels like every time it's happened for you, it's a choice that had to be made, and there was no other way out.
If you have too many characters who have plot armor, then you start losing the stakes that the reader has.
That's right.
When they did the first Superman adaptations, which were radio adaptations, the writers realized the character was too strong. That's why they invented kryptonite. It was the radio writers were afraid of kryptonite because the character was too invulnerable. Like how do you worry about the death of a god?
One of the things when I was doing A Battle for Forever, the characters, they age like 1 day for every 100 days. So the lead character looks like he's about 17, but he's really 1,500 years old. But I didn't want to make him immortal. Like if they stepped in front of a bus, they die. And it gives it more immediacy.
If left unchecked, there's no emotional stakes left. And also, there are certain characters that their presence alone makes it too easy to win, so you got to get rid of them. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a great example of that. There's no reason he should have died that easily in the first movie, but it was important because otherwise Luke would never have risen to his power.
Never would have grown. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself through writing? For me, I realized I probably would have needed a lot more therapy. Writing has probably saved me mid-six figures of therapy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, every novel's, for me, is worth about a good 3 months of therapy. So, But the most surprising thing, I think that I enjoyed fiction. I didn't think I would. I was so entrenched in the nonfiction world. When I tried fiction, I really expected to hate it and to feel it was a drudge. And it was exact opposite. It absolutely liberated me and filled me with more joy in my craft than I had in anything I was doing in that craft before. And I actually went from being a part-time nonfiction writer with a hell of a lot of debt to being a comfortably well-off fiction writer. I didn't see that coming at all. Another fun, surprising thing is I never expected to become friends with the writers whose books I read. I didn't see any of that shit coming. That's part of the imposter syndrome. Who am I to be friends with them?
Right.
Well, they're working schlubs like you are.
They are. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because I'm not just doing people where someone sends me a book. I'm talking to people who I've read before I decided to do this. And it's a different experience. I know your shit and it's exciting. And I had the same experience with some screenwriters where I'm hanging out. We're about to end this lovely marathon that's been so much fun talking with you.
I've had a blast.
It's been great. So I'm the worst at getting off the phone. My kids make fun of me. I start to say goodbye and then I'll start another conversation.
I have to go to work. I have to write something yet today.
So I'm saying goodbye, but if we were hanging out, we've got, a couple more beverages, it's a couple hours down the road or even a couple days from now, what's the story or the thing that you would tell me that you haven't told me so far?
Probably some of my bodyguard stories, because they're good stories, but I don't tell them publicly because some of the people that I worked, I was a bodyguard in the entertainment industry. We were only hired when there was a credible threat. So we're not an entourage guard. We were specifically there when there was a credible threat while law enforcement was investigating, we were protecting. And sometimes it was the performer or somebody in the performer's band who actually created the circumstances that caused the threat. They're kind of the bad guy, but we're protecting them against a repercussion. And some of those people, like there's one in particular, and won't name, of course, who was an asshole back when I met him in the 80s, who is one of the greatest guys now. He went through a lot of therapy and a lot of changes. But if I were to tell the story of how his personality was when I knew him in 1980, 81, it would be a disservice to the distance traveled since then in terms of him as a person. So why do that? So that's something we could talk about over a martini or two, but not in a public forum, of course.
Right.
There are some people who they clearly walk the walk, and you should not punch them for what they did 30 years ago. Now, mind you, there are some crimes or some actions that are so heinous. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who may have early on in a career became really big and started believing their own hype and acted like that and treated people like they're less than them.
Yeah.
But then they got a perspective check.
Right. And I also think a good redemption arc is...
I'm a big fan of redemption arcs.
Big fan. Jonathan, honestly, this has been a pleasure. And
Edward, I could talk to you for 20 hours in a row. This is great. So I've had more fun on this podcast than almost anything I've done in like the last 5 years. This is my kind of podcast, an actual conversation.
That's what I wanted, because as I said to Chris Moore, we don't have an Algonquin roundtable.
Sadly, we don't.
We don't. And this is our closest thing. And I want to be able to keep in touch with people and do that. So I hope we get to do this again.
Oh, I'd be happy to come back and have a longer conversation with you or another conversation with you, but, and also maybe run into each other, at an event somewhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Don't Worry, No One's Listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Take care.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
DWNOL is produced by Lisa Lindo for Rocket Surgeon Productions and presented by Bookstr. DWNOL themes by Trina Davis and Annie Musical Team. More later. Oh, hey, I forgot one last thing. Steve Jobs said, "Real artists ship," which is something every striving artist should remember. Everyone has ideas, and I mean everyone, but real artists deliver on them.